All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for showing up. Before we start today's presentation, I know it's a little earlier and we're already running a little bit late, but let's see, our March meeting be in this room, March 19th. We have the Ag Commissioner, Andrew Smith, coming to talk about some new regulations. Actually, I wrote that down, and I forgot to bring what I wrote down. But he's coming to talk. We'll have actually an hour of laws and regs is what we've applied for that program. So that'll be really cool to catch up with Andrew, and we'll have an opportunity for Q&A with him. April, we have Cindy Cron coming to give us an update on spotted lanternfly. And then May, we'll have a Zoom meeting because we can't get Michelle Moyer down here, but she's agreed to present on powdery mildew. So each of the next 3 months also are the third Thursdays. So the 19th, I forget what April is, I think the 15th, and then whatever the third Thursday is in May. But you'll see the updates come out for those. And then if you weren't able to attend Grape Day, we do still have some extra handouts from that. So those are in the back here. And we also have some handouts from our speakers today on the back table. So be sure to grab those and be sure you sign in. And if you haven't renewed your dues and membership, please remember to do that as well. And so I'm just going to jump straight in. We have Philip Gauthier from Fruition Sciences is going to kick us off. Later we'll hear from Keith Abels from the Sonoma RCD. And is Brett coming today also?
Should be.
Okay, great. And then we'll hear from Brett also. But to start us off, we have Philip. Philip, thank you for presenting.
Absolutely. Good morning, everybody. Give me just a moment here. Oops. Oh, no. This is a new laptop for me, sorry. I think. There we go. All right, good morning. Good to be here with you all. There are a few familiar faces, just a few, but everybody else, first time meeting you all, so thank you for having me. I work with Fruition Sciences. I've been there almost a decade now, and I spend a lot of time looking at plant data and understanding how it relates to the way that vines use water. So I'm going to show you kind of how we do this today, what we see worldwide, and some of the different kinds of ways we can modify plant water use based on what we see in the data. So we do a 4-step process, very loosely. First things first, we start by, of course, measuring, but we measure plant-specific data, so we actually take measurements from the plant. Lots of different ways to do this. Next, we take our data and analyze it in the context of the climate, in the context of the way the blocks have performed in the past, and also what our goals are for the year. So analysis is a very big part of this. Once we've learned what's going on, we take step 3 and we decide what to do or not to do based on what we're seeing. And then we evaluate the impact of whatever we do or don't do in the vineyard. So let's start with the start, and we'll think about how we go about measuring. So I have a little bit of a background which might not be new for any of you, but of course the vine exists in between 2 compartments. So we think about the soil in the way that it supplies water, and we think about the climate in the way that it demands water, but we understand that in the middle we have a living organism that's going to regulate itself based on the various needs and the demands. So we need to understand both demand, supply, but also the plant itself to get a full picture of what's actually going on and how the vine is responding in real time. So in terms of climatic demand, we know, of course, we use reference evapotranspiration, reference ET. You probably get this from your weather station. We just want to make a note that this is always in reference to a well-watered field of grass, so these are the references. These are used to establish the equations that are used to give you this calculation from your weather station, but it's always in reference to grass, really dense, lots of transpiration. It's usually per square meter of grass. So when we go to use this, we need to do some conversions. This is where your crop coefficients come into play. You should know that pretty well, and we'll look at how this actually plays out in real time. So I have some data from, I just checked right before this, excuse me, this is about 2 miles from here, the public Sims station in Windsor. So this is the total transpiration the total demand of ET-ref from the start of the year to the end of the year over the last 6 years. So in 3 warm years in the beginning, we're floating around 1,200 liters per square meter. You might see your units from your weather station in millimeter. It's the same thing. It's just how many liters per square meter. That's the way this works out, and in terms of fields of grass at least. So 1,200 at the high end, and then the last 3 years it's been a little bit cooler. We're looking at around 1,000 liters per square meter of demand, again, for 1 square meter of grass at that weather station about 2 miles from here. So if we focus instead on the first 6 months of the year, if we cut ourselves off at around a rough date for fruit set, around the middle of June, we have about 40 to 50% of that total demand. But if you were to look at this over a course of 6 months, on a daily basis, you'd see very little demand in the beginning, of course, nice and cold, and then as you get towards May and June, it gets much warmer and you see quite a bit more. But about half of that demand is in the first 6 months. So we know the pull, the demand, the half of the equation, but we look at, of course, the other half, the total input. Again, those 3 warm years, 20 through 22, not a lot of rain. This is the entire year and not a lot happening, and then much, much more rain in 23, 24, and 25. So even though 25 was not quite so much rain compared to 23, it was still quite a bit in the context of a 6-year window. But we understand both our input and our output, and we start to understand how the system works. If we subtract one from another, we can get a really clear idea of the natural water availability. So again, total water input and total water output, we start to see that back in 21 through 22, those are drought years, and very clearly we have a negative water balance by the time we get to June. In contrast, 23, we had quite a bit of water, and then just this last year, we were sort of teetering almost on zero. Again, this is all just for grass. This is if we had just a field of grass we were monitoring per square meter. This is where we'd be by the time we get to June. We'd probably be into a level of deficit in 25 by the time we reach July, and our grass would start to die. So we need to know what's actually going on with the plant. So one of the ways that we do this at Fruition, we install these sensors on the vines. So these are SATSO sensors, you've probably heard of them. We do some other measurements too, but these ones give us the kind of clearest understanding of what's going on. So they measure in real time. That little orange strip there puts in a really small amount of heat. In fact, if you grab it, you can't even really feel it. And there are little sensors embedded throughout the body, and it measures basically where this heat goes. It uses the STEM heat balance method to understand how much the vine is transpiring in real time, 24 hours a day. It takes measurements every 15 minutes, I think, and we get a really clear sense. It's like having a flow meter installed on the vine. So what do we actually see when we do this? We can see, this is for an example site, not too far away from here, over in Chalk Hill. If we look at June through August, this site consumed almost 400 liters per vine in 2023 for that 6-week period, and then in 24, around 200, 225 liters per vine.
That's for the year?
No, this is just 6 weeks, just between fruit set and veraison.
Sorry.
So we know, I'm going to build on this. We'll get there. No, just a 6-week window between fruit set and veraison, very roughly. I've converted it to gallons just to make it easier to kind of relate to what we use, but quite a bit less water used in this period between fruit set and veraison in 24 compared to 23. So we have our baseline, we've done some measurements, and we see that when the water balance dropped by about 50%, we of course also see a plant that drops its rate of consumption. It becomes a little bit more efficient. This is maybe a case where we weren't really doing anything. We weren't adding additional water in 24. We had plenty of water, and we decided that we did not need to supplement the vine at all, but we see it becomes a little more efficient. And I have some more examples to show you of this that'll make it a little more clear. The point that I want to make is that it's not a direct one-to-one link. Of course, they both go up and down together, but it's not tied directly together. We don't see, for example, if the water balance drops another 25% next year, we can't assume our vine will also become 25% more efficient. It's not always going to work like that. But this direct measurement we take lets us actually see what's happening. We can see the climate, we can see the soil, we know how much rain there is, we know how much demand there is. This missing piece in the middle, directly measuring the plant, really gives us a lot of context for what's actually going on inside the plants and how they respond to the growing conditions. So for step 2, we're going to do some analysis. So we already know sort of the baseline for how this plant's performed between 2023 and 24. And so we're going to look forward to 25. Let's imagine it's like June 1st of 25. And we see, okay, it's been relatively cool. It's not been intensely hot. It's been a slightly mild year. Second coolest actually in the last 6 years, so not crazy. And we also know that our rainfall is potentially non-limiting. We have plenty of rain. If we look back at 20 through 22, it's a lot. But if we're looking at 23, it's not quite so much. It's about half as much rain. So how much is enough? How is this vine going to actually respond? Again, our water balance is much lower. So in 23, we had low demand and we had a lot of rain. Excuse me. In 24, we had lots of rain and it was very demanding. It was quite hot. And then in 25, we had also low demand, but not quite so much rain. So how is this vine actually going to respond? Again, we're looking at the period from January 1st through June 15th, when tissues are forming, leaves are growing, shoots are expanding. Everything is growing. This is the adolescent phase of the year, I guess. And how does it set the stage for the later parts of the season? Again, the vine continues to become more resilient and become more efficient. So if we look at that window of how the conditions were presented in the early part of the season, when the tissues were forming and the shoots were growing, we can see that it clearly dictates pretty well how the vine uses water in the later part of the year. I think an important note here, there's no irrigation applied to this block in any of these situations up until veraison. So we're just seeing the vine responding to its conditions. We're seeing that year over year, the shoot length is really good. It was the same in 2024 and 25, around 4 feet, and it actually yielded about 4.5 tons per acre last year. So in response to having a tighter budget, it grows up in a tougher environment, so to speak, and we tend to see that it becomes able to do more with less and become more efficient. It's less wasteful in the long term. Uses less water to do more with it. So in conclusion, well, not conclusion, conclusion for this section, we need to understand effectively the straw in this scenario. We know the climate, so the person drinking from the straw. We know the demand, the supply, that's how much water's in the cup. We need to understand really clearly what's going on with the plants themselves to get a really good idea of the whole picture of how these things all interplay together. And that helps us get a really good sense of what's going to happen throughout the season and also forecast for what might happen the next season if we know what's going to happen based on the climate. So let's imagine that it's this year and we start to see what's going on. We see that it's rained a bit, we have some demand, and we know how this vine performs, but imagine that we maybe don't like the performance we're seeing. We want to steer ourselves in a different direction. What can we do about it? We can either intervene or not, depending on what we see. So we can intervene. We like to think about this in two broadly different ways, two big categories. So the way that we think about this, on the left, we have ways that we can modify the way that we use the resources we already have. So either modifying our canopy to speed up or slow down the rate of water use, or we can introduce or remove cover crops to maybe introduce some competition and reduce that pool of resources available. In contrast, we of course can also just add new resources. Maybe we don't have the ability to modify our canopies anymore, or we're already struggling, so let's add some irrigation, let's add some nutrients and keep these vines moving and meet the demand where it is for the vines. So very broadly, our first chance to intervene in the season is to do the shoot thinning operation. We know, of course, this is going to modify directly how much transpiring leaf area there is on the vine for either adding or leaving shoots. I'm sorry, not adding, leaving or removing shoots, depending on our needs for the year. But also timing for this can be a really good tool for understanding how we're going to modify water use throughout the year. So I have a great example. We do a lot of work with trials over in France. We know there's a lot less irrigation available over there, so we tend to see a lot more impact of trials like this. So we're looking at, in red, shoot length for a site that we monitored in Bordeaux. And you can see it starts off pretty consistently trending upwards, and we see the rate of growth per growing degree day in the blue over there. So around 400 GDD, we see the growth rates increasing as the shoots are getting larger, and they're starting to grow faster and faster, and at a certain point they turn around. And you can see it reflected also in the shoot length. It starts to taper off and slow down. We're measuring primary shoots in this example that we're going to keep. At this point, the shoot thinning is performed. We remove the competition, we remove those extra shoots, and all those resources are redirected into the primary ones that we want to keep. And we can see growth rate and shoot length both start to take off again. So we know we have a limited water budget in this case. We cannot put irrigation down, but we can optimize the way that our vines are sending resources to the tissues that we want to keep by timing our shoot thinning operation more effectively based on this plant data. So we see that crash, that's earlier than we want, that decrease in the growth rate. We know that we still have quite a ways to go. Had we not intervened, we might have ended up with something like 60 or 70 centimeters of shoot length. It's like 2.5 feet roughly. So we intervene and we see it takes off again. Things go quite well. Within a year, we can think about doing this to reduce or leave the number of growing points, to either keep more shoots, remove more shoots, and that can help us take moisture out of the soil faster or slower, depending on the conditions we're facing. But also long-term, doing this long-term and doing it effectively is going to help us keep our vine in balance for longer, which will help favor long-term health. So this is always a good thing to do. If we can get our shoot thinning operation timed properly, we of course will make things easier for us right now, but also make things easier for us long-term. But letting the plant kind of tell us what it's experiencing and then responding to that to help it thrive. We have another trial that we can show you some examples from. So this was, of course, again in Bordeaux, and we did a trial comparing the way that a vine uses water when it's either hedged or braided. That's our control, is braided over on the left. So we did not do any trimming, we just braid the shoots together and compare how they use water both throughout the whole season, but also over time throughout the season. And we see some really interesting results from this. So both sites are identical. They're next to each other. You can see the buildings in the background are the same spacing, same variety, same clone, everything's the same. Neither one is irrigated. All the inputs and the outputs are all identical. So when we did this, we did not, of course, do anything other than allow them to do the hedging. We just installed the sensors to monitor how much water they use, and we see some really interesting changes. So the block that is the control that has no hedging done, you can see it spikes in water use the 1st of July, and then sort of remains stable and then tapers off. What you're not seeing in here is that there was a really big heat wave in Bordeaux in August, and demand skyrocketed. So to respond, plants should be increasing the amount of water they're using. The hedged block was able to do that. So early on, we trimmed it, and the water use was reduced, and then you can see later on it spikes in response. So there's a limited pool of water available. We trimmed the vine back early. It's not abnormally small. We just removed those excess growing points. We removed that excess leaf area, and we can see that we slow the vine down and allow it to get through its resources more slowly, and then we have more available for later. And also overall, it was about a 30% reduction in water use total in this trimmed block compared to the one that was braided. So of course, depending on what you need out of your blocks, out of your production goals, you might choose one or the other. Maybe you have blocks that are way too vigorous and there's a lot going on, lots of water in the soil. So in that case, maybe you do the braid. But the point is, when we're facing a limited set of resources, we know that using our hedging and trimming our vines can help us conserve more for later in situations like this. So within a season, again, we're thinking about regulating, either increase or decreasing our leaf area to help us regulate our vine's water consumption. And then long term, if we're able to do this effectively, we can think about reducing our overall dependence on water. So keeping that canopy in control, keeping the vigor level sort of tempered down, we can reduce the amount of times we need to revisit and add resources into the system. So another trial we have some cool data from. We did a multi-year trial of cover crop. So we have a block that was historically always tilled, always cultivated, and we wanted to see the effects of installing a cover crop, both short-term and long-term, to understand how this impacted the vine's water use itself, both in the short term and the long term. Again, we're in Bordeaux. These blocks are identical. They don't get any inputs from irrigation, just rain. All the water you get in the winter season is all you're going to get. So, of course, as expected, in the first year, 2 years or so of the trial, you can see the tilled soil still cruising along, doing quite well. We're looking at the shoot elongation speed, so centimeters per growing degree day. When we install the cover crop, we install competition, and it slows down. That's to be expected. We have less resource available, and we have a vine that's going to develop more slowly. What's really, really interesting about this is long-term, we start to see some changes. So in year 2, we do see a reduced output in the water, so we're looking at liter per plant. The cover crop blocks are using less water overall. They have less available to them, and also importantly, the curve of how the water is used is pretty much the same. So it spikes in July and then sort of tapers off in August and September as water starts to run low. But after 5 years of this, we push this block to start exploring deeper soil horizons, and we can see that actually it ends up using more water. So the total inputs into both are the same, rainfall is the same, but now our block that has the cover crop installed is able to push deeper into the soil, access a deeper pool of resources, and actually maintain a higher level of water use for longer throughout the year as well. So you see it doesn't taper off and crash. It has a much deeper pool. And it's not necessarily competing directly with the cover crop in those higher soil horizons anymore. So we saw some yield losses in the beginning. Of course, we lose about half 0.7 or so tons per acre in the beginning. But by the time we get to year 5, they're pretty much the same. And now we have a block that's much more resilient. we can infer that its root system is probably deeper and it probably can do better in drought conditions in the future. So short term, we are thinking about installing cover crop because it might reduce the shoot growth rate and the vine's water consumption. Maybe that's something you want. Maybe it's just a trade-off to get to the long-term benefit, which might be to help reduce our dependency on water and build a more drought-tolerant block. But overall, we always try to make the point that when we're doing things like this, it doesn't necessarily work everywhere. Obviously, your soils might not like it. You might not have the capability to do it, but we can also use data like this. This is just shoot length divided by growing degree day, the change of shoot length over time divided by how many GDD have passed in a week, and we can get a really good sense that it's impacting our vines, but not too much. It's still sustainable. We can tolerate this, and it's a good trade-off we can make until we get to the point that the vines build that tolerance we want. We jump forward again. So our other category, we talked about modifying the way the vines are going to be using water, but also we can think about irrigating, of course. We want to add new resources into the system just to make sure that these vines maintain a healthy level of transpiration and stay functional throughout the year and help us reach our goals. So we, of course, do this all the time, depending on what the season throws at us, depending on what our blocks need. I just have one example to give you of when we might use this later in the year. So watching the sugar per berry of a block, not the concentration, but the actual sugar, total sugar milligrams per berry to understand how the fruit is ripening. So from the point of duration, start taking samples. We're taking bricks, but also berry weight on a known number of berries, so we can see not only the concentration of the berries as they start to grow, but also the actual sugar content of those grapes. So we know when we see bricks going up, is this due to new sugar being loaded into the fruit, or is this due to a dehydrating effect from maybe a heat wave? A very important distinction. And when we do that, when we start to look at that unit, the sugar per berry in milligrams instead of bricks, we can see things like this. This early slowdown right where my arrow is, that's much earlier than we expect. We know, for example, from measuring this block for many years that it should reach around 200 milligrams. We also tend to see that this variety in this region usually reaches that point. That early slowdown tells us there might be a problem here. So we can double check. Just with this fruit data we see there might be an issue. We can check our weather data and see there's not necessarily a heat wave at this point. We see some stress. It's time to apply some water and make sure these vines keep functioning. So this is from our sap flow sensors. So what we would have done at this example, if I go back, like I said, look at the climate data, look at the plant data, understand, is this due to soil moisture drought or is it due to heat? Which one is causing this problem? Is this dehydration or is this a stop of loading? And that'll help us decide how to intervene. So we check our sensors and we see a really clear, interesting effect. With the sap flow system, we can see a very big difference in how the vines respond hourly over the course of a day, depending on if they have water or not. So on the left, we have an example of a block that does not have water. It's starting to stress. It runs into stress early in the day. It sort of cuts itself off and begins to close its stomates and stop transpiring earlier. So if you were to draw a curve of demand throughout the day, it would really be around 2 or 3, that you would see the peak of climatic demand. And in a healthy vine with plenty of water, it should meet that exactly where it is. It should follow basically the demand of the curve as long as there's plenty of water and there's no stress. But when we see that there's a lack of water, we tend to see this early slowdown and cut off as the vine. We talk a lot about closing down the system, and we can clearly see it in these sensors. So they help us validate what we suspect from what we see in our fruit data. There might be a problem here. Is it due to high VPD conditions? Is it due to a heat wave? Or is it due to soil moisture drought? It's soil moisture. Let's apply some water. Let's fix this. So within a season, we could do this, of course, all year long. We could think about maybe shoot length isn't growing fast enough, so we add water. We could think about there's too much stress, so we add water in the period in between fruit set and veraison. But in this example, we could think about adding irrigation, of course, to keep sugar loading going quickly and getting us towards our harvest goals. But long term, we always try to emphasize that it's a great strategy to try to limit irrigation as much as we can, overall reducing the vine's dependency on water, really just irrigating when the vine tells you itself through the data that you're measuring that there's something wrong, I need water. So that can be sugar per berry like we saw, or shoot length, or sap flow, really in a lot of measurements to do this. So I want to show you some interesting examples from different places. I have a few local examples, and I also have some interesting regions that we work in to show you how much all of these can contrast. But looking at some results from around the world to see what we see in plant data and the ways that vines can vary their water output to lots of different growing environments. So starting with two very, very different terroir. The first one on the left, northern Israel, we have some customers up there, and it is a very interesting climate, extremely hot, and compared to the East Bank of Bordeaux, compared to Pomerol, we have, of course, much, much more demand in Israel. So very, very different demand, almost 1,000 liters per plant at the top of that graph on the left, and basically a quarter of that in Bordeaux. So much more demanding. What's also really interesting here is the level, the percentage of what the demand is. Excuse me. So we see ETREF is somewhere around 800 or so liters per plant, and our plants in Israel are putting out around 100. So roughly 20% of that. In Bordeaux, very different. We're meeting a much higher percentage of that demand. And really, if you're familiar with this kind of stuff, if we just divide one from the other, all we're really doing here is directly measuring the crop coefficient. So taking out the soil, taking out the evaporation, we're directly measuring water output of the plant, dividing it by demand, and getting an actual measured crop coefficient from these plants. So in Israel, it's around 18%, which is quite low. It seems surprisingly low, but these blocks are able to tolerate it quite well. They do very, very well. They put out plenty of fruit, and it's a pretty good quality. And in contrast, we see a much, much higher crop coefficient in Pomerol, especially in June, which then drops off dramatically. So the point I want to make with this slide, in Israel, these blocks have been trained towards drought tolerance. They've been trained to do more with less year over year over year. And even though this crop coefficient is very, very low, it's still sustainable in this case. In contrast, this block in Pomerol has not been trained. There has been not really any kind of regulation of how it's using water. So it's allowed to grow very large. And in June, it's using lots and lots of water, about 50% of demand. So the crop coefficient is about 0.5. But you can see it starts to run out and it crashes, and that can be a problem. This is what that would look like. So this is actually that same block. So we know through April, May, and part of June, it's growing. There's no shortage of water. Shoots are getting longer. Things are going quite well. It is not controlled, and there is no drought tolerance here, so it's allowed to get a little too big, and we have a crop coefficient that consumes too much water, and we start to see it crash. And we can't apply irrigation here. It's forbidden. So we see the only real input we're getting is a few small little rain events through June and July, and then we actually get those ones at the beginning of September are actually kind of large, so 30 millimeters, so it should be a couple inches of rain. By that point, it's kind of too late. We had this really, really aggressive collapse of output. So there's not any water available. The plant goes from transpiring at 100% of its capacity down to basically 10%. And we likely have some cavitation. We likely have some vascular damage here. And we can see even when we get water in this case, it's kind of too late. We can only get back up to about 40% of what we could put out before. So, excuse me, this block was allowed to do too much early in the season, not controlled, not reined in, and it kind of set itself up for failure later in the year. It should have been, if we had irrigation, we could have, of course, supplemented it with irrigation, but in this case, we do not. So the better strategy would have been to maybe reduce the size of the canopy through hedging, maybe pull off more shoots at shoot thinning time, but make sure that we can keep our pool of resources available all the way through the year so we don't face a situation like this. So when we see this kind of uncontrolled collapse of transpiration, there can be some very serious consequences. So we see the sugar loading, the total sugar per berry, we know it should be somewhere around 200, 250 or so milligrams per berry. We stop at around 130, and our berries only reach between 0.6 or 0.7 grams when they should be around 1 to 1.2 grams per berry. So early stop to maturation, and we also see at the same time visual symptoms. So this is roughly 3 to 4 weeks after that massive deficit that took place in July, August. We relieved it, we had rain. Things should be good now, but it's already too late. That was an uncontrolled, crazy amount of deficit, and now we have leaves that are falling too early. We have berries that are shriveling up, and we have not a great year at this site. In contrast, this is a site not so far from here in Sonoma. We monitored it all year. We have the ability to input water, and we also controlled the size of the canopy early. So we do have some deficit, but those are irrigations that are applied. So we control it through irrigations that are targeted specifically to keep that deficit under control, but also, again, we don't have an overly vigorous canopy. And in this case, we have a much, much healthier rate of sugar loading. So we reach 250 milligrams, we reach about 1.1 grams per berry. These are a little bit large last year. It was kind of the trend everywhere, basically, at least throughout Sonoma, Napa. larger berries, but overall things look really good. So some deficit, of course, is good. We want to do it, but we want to do it safely, and we want to allow the plant-specific data to help guide us, whether it's sap flow, whether it's sugar per berry, or whether it's shoot length. We want to make sure that we put the plant at the center of the conversation. We have to kind of speak its language, but try to understand what it's telling us. Either I'm stressed or I'm not, or how are things going. So again, sort of a 4-step process. Start by measuring, but measure the plant itself to try to understand how it's going. Analyze that data in the context of the climate, but also in the context of our production goals and also how our plants have done in the past, and then decide what to do or not to do, depending on what we're seeing. And then we can evaluate how it's gone. Did it work? Did it not work? And we sort of just repeat the cycle year over year and month after month to understand what's going on. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I'll take however many questions I have time for, if you have any. If you have any follow-up questions, this is my email. You can also scan this and it'll put me right in your contacts, so feel free to do that too. But I'll answer whatever questions you might have. Yes?
Okay. I was looking at your sugar, your irrigation and your sugar accumulation per berry.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of our winemakers say, you know, I much prefer to have a level there and let the flavonoid, you know, the other flavors come up. How do those two work with when you get up to your 200 plus sugar concentration or whatever you do?
You mean, how does the flavor evolve at that point?
Say that again?
How does the flavor evolve once we get to that point?
Yeah.
We can tend to
The
see,
trade-off.
well, we see kind of year over year, when we have a good, healthy level of stress leading up to veraison, so when we're able to apply targeted deficit before the veraison point, we tend to see that flavor and sugar tend to evolve more cohesively. So as the sugar is loading, the flavor's evolving at the same time, and we tend to see there's not so much of a need for a long hang time compared to really cold years or maybe a block that has way too much irrigation and doesn't really have any stress. They tend to become separated. So you'll have sugar loading that moves, and then you tend to have to wait quite a while for the flavor to develop. Hopefully I answered your question. Okay.
I noticed that when you do interventions, it looks like you sacrifice yield for water sustainability adaptation. Is that?
It depends. It depends on the case, and it depends on what window we're looking at. So when we looked at that cover crop example, we lost 0.7 tons per acre in the short term, and then long term we are now not really having to worry about it in this case. We also like to stress the idea that if we think about like removing shoots, for example, it might seem crazy to remove a lot of shoots early, but we could be in a situation where we have not enough leaf area to ripen our fruit, and then we have to go through and crop thin. So, yeah, there could be short-term losses. We think both ways. Yes.
Just leave one question. You know, we talked about doing shoot growth measurements and right, and then also pretty straightforward evapotranspiration, right?
Yeah.
The question becomes is when you have a root-based problem, right? So, for example, I have vineyards where there's nematodes that have been beaten on the roots forever, so that they don't respond as well versus, let's say, a vineyard right next door that doesn't have nematodes, because the roots are so compromised that I have to, functionally, from my perspective, I got to irrigate them more to get the same amount of shoot growth because of that. So how would if we're doing those measurements that you're talking about, how would you see that, right? Because let's say that's affecting my shoot growth and elongation because I'm not, but the evapotranspiration would be functionally the same, or even I'm adding, there's a little bit of a disconnect, you know what I mean? If that makes sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think
right, because you're measuring all the stuff on the up and what is leaving potentially the plant or how it's growing. But if your roots are compromised, and whether we say it's phylloxera or nematodes or whatever, and their ability to absorb water that might actually all be there is compromised, do your systems, can they deal with that? Like, how would they, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think so. We always try to just measure the plant itself and try to understand what it's doing. So in this case, we'd probably see, if we didn't apply any irrigation, we'd probably do those shoot length measurements. We'd see that rate of growth really low, and it would be I mean, you're telling me now what the problem is, but we would see that and go,
Yeah,
something's
yeah,
wrong
why,
here. Something's
right.
clearly wrong here. And we're just here to kind of inform and understand there's something going on, or, hey, it's actually doing quite well. And then based on whatever the issue is, we can think about how are we going to manage this? How do we intervene? But it's sort of just there to help us get a really clear understanding of what's actually happening. How much of an impact is this actually happening? And then maybe you have an idea of what you can do to treat it, whatever that might be. Let's see how effective it is. And we have a clear kind of compass to guide us using this shoot length measurement when we're adding in the growth rate.
And then obviously, once you trim it, the growth length, obviously you have to switch to different measurements, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Right, so that doesn't apply after, say, June or whatever, depending on it, kind of.
Yeah, usually you see as soon as hedging's done, you just see it kind of flatline. But in some cases, if we're measuring, like we're stick to the same number of shoots, we're measuring these fixed shoots all year long. Maybe some of them underperform, and so you hedge, and we're getting the average, but it'll maybe creep up a little bit. 'Cause that one didn't get cut off, and it's still kind of
Still
creeping.
actually,
After that, we pay attention to apexes, and then we, if we have the SAT flow system installed, that kind of is
takes over.
that's like the magnifying glass version, yeah. Yes.
That slide you had on the comparison of Israel to, I think, Bordeaux was like really impressive. The water use efficiency of the vines in Israel is crazy, but you might have said it and I missed it, so sorry if that's the case, but how much of that do you think is attributed to like pre-planting decisions, like rootstock variety, trellising, like what's the comparison there versus within season like irrigation or planting management?
This is a wonderful question because we're looking at liters per plant, not liters per square meter. So we're thinking, I mean, the planting density is a lot higher in Bordeaux. So if we're thinking about demand per square meter, it'd be a little bit different. But that has everything to do with it. They made a lot of decisions for what's their planting density, what kind of rootstock are they using, what kind of varieties and clones, and that all plays into it. How much before and after, I couldn't tell you directly, but they also are very, very good about pushing these blocks with targeted deficit to build resilient root systems. I visited these blocks. It's crazy, crazy dry over there. It's really interesting. Have to see how they do it.
Do they dig backfill pits and see how far down the roots go on those?
Probably. I haven't talked to him about it, but
I'm curious to
probably.
see how deep they go.
Yeah.
Another question. When you apply water, do you use pressure bomb readings to help you decide when to apply?
We like to use the SAT flow if we can. If we don't have it, we like to use shoot length. We like to use sugar per berry. We know the pressure bomb is really widespread. We tend to look at it with kind of an asterisk on all the data because there's a big climate parameter. So if it's super hot out but there's still water and it's still flowing, we can see a kind of high reading, a really negative measurement. So in terms of timing, we would try to do it with, for example, in the early part of the year, we would just look for any early premature slowdowns in the growth rate. Or later in the year, we'd look for a premature slowdown in the sugar loading rate. And then mid-season, we'd probably be paying attention to, again, SAT flow if we have it, or especially hot climate parameters. So sometimes, we have some customers, that's what they do. They've been doing it forever, and they want to keep doing it, and that's great. They use it as a compass. We tend to look at it with a little bit of a grain of salt with the pressure chamber. We know there's some nuance that needs to be given to it at least. Yes?
With that in mind, do you know if in Israel, are they working with any rootstocks that we don't currently have available here that we should be looking at, given drought tolerance?
Not that I know of, but that's a great question. I'm going to find out. As far as I know, they don't, but I'll send them an email.
I recently learned an Andy Walker quote that there's never a perfect choice, it's just the least bad choice.
Right.
And having recently had to make that choice, I hate it more than ever, so.
I can find out. That's a good question. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. Thanks for your time.
All right, next we have Keith Abels from Sonoma RCD, and Keith is going to present on some soil health. Whoops, sorry. That's the same one. Soil health stuff in relation to water. And this one here, right?
About right.
All right. All right, please welcome Keith Abels.
Right, and to make it
Oh yeah, just use the
just
arrow. I
arrow.
couldn't find a
Okay.
little clicker. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. All right, thanks everyone. My name's Keith Abels. I work at the Sonoma Resource Conservation District, which I call the RCD. And just quick note on the RCDs, there's 2 of them in our county. They're throughout the state, but there's 2 in our county. I'm with Sonoma, as is Brett, who's going to speak a little later. And Goldridge is sort of the classic West County, south of the river at Forestville over to the coast. But we do work with them quite a bit. But we work on soil and water management, conservation types of activities. We do all kinds of things. Check out our website to learn more. And I'm going to be talking today, as the title here is, The Soil as a Reservoir, Organic Matter Strategies to Reduce Irrigation Demand. And I'm going to be spending most of my time talking about sort of the relationship of increasing organic matter and having more water in the soil, and how that can help with your general water management approach. So this big picture, how do we retain more water in the soil in our agricultural setting? It's to increase organic matter, it's to reduce tillage, it's to keep the soil covered all year, avoid compaction by equipment and hard rains, and that's the keeping the soil covered is part of that, and where possible, integrating livestock into the fields. I imagine you've taken that up at some of your meetings here. So that's something that some people are doing now, and maybe more in the future. So increasing organic matter. And what is organic matter? It's part of your soil. I imagine people here are pretty familiar with organic matter and, doing sampling where they might see what it is. It really ranges in a lot of the agricultural soils we see here. I've seen like as low as 1%, 5% is often a target, but not often achieved here. So, people are trying to increase their organic matter, and half of organic matter is generally carbon. And so sometimes you'll see in my presentation, there's organic matter, organic carbon, soil organic matter, soil organic carbon, but we're really kind of talking about the same thing, because roughly half of organic matter is carbon. So how do we increase it in like viticultural systems? It's with cover crops, compost application, which seems to be becoming more popular of a practice where possible. Reducing tillage in our systems. We can increase organic matter through planting hedgerows and other woody plants. And some people are using mulch around the vines and in their planting areas, and even when you mow your prunings, even that's sort of almost a form of mulch, a light mulch there, and those all increase organic matter. So we're going to talk about why is organic matter good? It improves soil structure, and good soil structure is pretty synonymous with healthy soil. And, so the more we can improve our soil, have better structure, have greater health, the better our systems will produce and produce over a sustainable period of time. So organic matter helps to form larger and more stable aggregates. Those are the clumps of soil that you get. It increases pore space for air circulation and water infiltration. It can also create larger pores. I mean, a good healthy soil with good structure has a whole, wide range of different pore sizes, which we want, because you want the big ones good for infiltration, so water, runs into the pores on the soil, not off into the ditch or waterway nearby. But also you want smaller pores or medium-sized pores, ones that aren't so small like you get in clay that hold on to the water so tight that, yes, the water's there if you took a test, but it's not necessarily plant available water. We want plant available water is the name of the game. So a good soil structure will have a variety of pore sizes, so it both holds onto the water, brings it in. It also helps to reduce the compaction and the bulk density of the soil. Soil should be like, half spaces and a half soil, actual, material. That's what we want. Organic matter has this incredible ability to hold water, for both physical and chemical interactions that are happening. So it can hold up to 90% of its weight in water. So that's pretty amazing. Like I was saying, there's 2 sides of this. You want to infiltrate the water and then into the soil, and then once it's in the soil, you want to retain it and have it available later for plant use. So you want to increase the water infiltration And that's where I said, having more pores, bigger, larger pores, gives it a mechanism to enter instead of running off. And by keeping soil cover and other organic matter on the surface, then when there's hard rains or impacts from equipment and other things that might impact the soil, you're in a better position to soak in that water and protect the soil and maintain that good structure. This is kind of a well-known study in sort of the world of soil science and water holding capacity. It was 1994, so it's getting to be a while. But it was published in the Journal of Soil and Water Conservation, and it told us that when you can increase organic matter 0.5 to 3%, the water holding capacity doubled for all soil texture groups. So when we say soil texture, is it sandy? Is it loam? Is it clay? It improved all of them. And while it didn't improve it, once it hit 3% organic matter, it continued to improve. Not at the same, maybe it didn't double like it said, but it still improved as the more organic matter, the more water holding is what this study saw. And there's a lot of other studies that have shown that as well. So, and yeah, this particular study showed a silt loam with 4% organic matter. That's pretty high organic matter, but something you might see in a vineyard that's got the right kind of soil and the right management. And it doubled water. It held double the water at 1% organic matter as it increased. So that is the point. Now, but there's some evolution in the thinking here. So, I mentioned earlier, there's another way of looking at it. Organic matter holds 18 to 20 times its weight in water. Imagine if, you had water on you 18 to 20 times, that's pretty impressive. But they used to, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, NRCS, which I imagine most of you are familiar with, and they run the EQUIP program and the conservation, the CSP program. What does that stand for? The Conservation Stewardship Program. So the NRCS used to, you see this graphic in the bottom right, and you used to see that with, it says 1% increase of organic matter can hold an additional 25,000, it says in the graphic. I've seen 20,000. A lot of the literature used to say 1 acre inch, and that, an acre inch is enough to cover 1 acre, 1 inch of water deep. That's 27,154 gallons. That is evolving, though, and they're getting away from that sort of more hardened correlation. It can do that in many situations where you get an acre of inch increase in water holding capacity with 1% increase, but they're also seeing a lot of situations, a lot of studies showing where it's not that. And so, that could be because of the geology of the area, the soil type, the weather, how you're managing the soil, how are you managing your crop. There's a lot of factors that might influence that, but the general thinking is not to make these real hardened assumptions about, okay, you increase organic matter, you're going to get X amount more water. But what is staying consistent is that general, the thinking, there's been no change in the thinking that as you increase organic matter, you're not holding more water. There's still very strong evidence and scientific backup for that. So the idea is, though we might not have an exact number, is increase your organic matter, you're increasing your organic holding capacity and your infiltration. So I've worked with a soil scientist named Josh Beniston, who's very experienced and knowledgeable and been at it for a while. And I met with him a couple weeks ago, and he shared this study with me, and he said this is what a lot of soil scientists are really looking at now as sort of the standard, because the problem was there'd been a lot of studies in the last 20 years that had different findings, showing there's these really strong correlation between organic matter and water holding capacity. Others showing not so much. No negative, there's nothing negative, but there's some saying it's not that impactful. So the problem is a lot of these studies use different techniques. They're in different systems. There was it was kind of sometimes comparing apples to oranges to make these conclusions. So this study by the Soil Health Institute, which is in North America, they're really kind of the leaders in this in a lot of ways. They had their the project to evaluate soil health measurements, NAPSM, and they published in 2022 this article carbon-sensitive pedotransfer functions for plant available water. A pedon in the soil world, it's like the smallest classifiable, unit of soil. So if you hear that, that's what that means. It's got to be at least a meter cubed to be considered that, but sometimes it's bigger. And so they published this study that really wanted to, like I say, clarify a set of a lot of the studies that had been published in the 10, 20 years previous. So some of the details of the study and why it was a good one in really becoming more the basis of what a lot of soil scientists are thinking is that they looked at 124 sites across North America, mostly in the United States, some in Mexico and Canada. It was focused more on row crops and really they were studying, seeing how the impacts of cover crops and reduced tillage were the focus of most of these. So, most grape growers, and I imagine most in this room, using cover crops. Tillage is always a question. So it's very germane. And in the end, they used 1,731 intact soil cores. And that's important because soil cores are a much better way to look at the measurements. So a lot of times when people send their samples to a lab, there's a lot of physical impact that you do along the way. Like it's grinded, it's sieved, it's pressed. And so a lot of times these studies or the results you get, you're kind of analyzing a soil that it's metamorphized. It's changed from what it's like in the actual real environment it came from. So the intact soil cores ended up being a better way of looking at the getting results that reflect reality. And they looked at a number of parameters, including soil organic carbon, inorganic carbon, bulk density, and gravimetric water content when the soil was at field capacity. And another really great thing about the study is the sites were all 10 years or more, which for a study, that's a really long time. I mean, things tend to be, funded in like 2-3 year increments. So to have this level of long-term studies makes it a lot more useful, credible. And then they use the same sampling protocol throughout the sites. That's a big difference. That's a big issue we're having here with our own North Coast Soil Hub, where, people take samples in all these different ways and send them to different labs, and the labs don't do things quite the same, or, sometimes the same test might be different. So they really made it a more uniform study, and all textures of soils got included in this, which is another good thing because we see all of them here and even here. So the important findings, what were they? They were sort of what I've been saying, that healthy soil, rich in carbon, it's like a sponge, it soaks up more rainfall, and it stores more in the soil, and then you have more available later in time for your crops when it's needed. The lead of this study, Diana Bagnall, had this quote. She said, "A positive causal relationship between soil organic carbon and plant water holding capacity has a direct benefit by increasing crops' resistance to drought." So that's general, but that's what we want. That's the idea: is more organic matter, more healthier soil, healthier structure, more water available for your plants. So an increase in plant available water from organic carbon is more than double previous estimates from other studies that they'd done, in some cases 3 times as much. So that was pretty good finding, and that's what a lot of soil scientists are looking at more closely now. I'm going to give a quick example here. This is there's a kind of right near Chalk Hill, Alexander Valley. There's a vineyard I was working with. I did a carbon farm plan, and we wanted to quantify what is the water capacity, holding capacity improvement that is possible, because they had some soils that were around 1.5 to 2%, relatively low, but not pretty standard for what you might see in a lot of these areas. And so we're like, what if you had a 2% increase in soil organic matter as your goal? And so if you look at these numbers sort of step by step, if you increase it 1%, okay, originally I was using the acre inch that was used before, so that created 27,154 gallons per acre. So I looked at something more conservative, maybe something more that's more pragmatic or realistic if it's lower. So we look at 10,000 gallons per acre over 81 acres of vineyards that they have. That would have been 810,000 gallons, and that's for 1% organic matter increase. You double that for 2% increase, you're talking 1,620,000 gallons retained in the soil. That's 4.97 acre feet, which is pretty substantial. Especially, if you're limited in how much water you have. So, in this case, around 20,000 gallons more soil of additional water per acre in your vineyard. And if it was more, if it was that acre inch, which is possible, we don't know, then when you're talking something, more like 55,000 gallons. So looking at this another way, 4 inches of water is a pretty typical, of what people might deliver to a vineyard. In our county, as you get into Alexander Valley, people do, 6 inches is more what's needed, although a lot of times people are doing more like a foot during the year, 12 inches. But 4 inches, a lot of our county is what you need. And so in this situation, you could deliver 3.25 inches instead because of the amount that's being held in your soil. Which, turns out to be a little over 20,000 gallons an acre. And then the important takeaway here for irrigation things is that you start later. I mean, that time when the plant available water draws down and you need to start irrigating, that's much later. And then this last point might be the most important, and Philip was starting to get at this in some of his slides. And this is something that Mark Greenspan, who a lot of you are probably familiar with, who really knows his water management well and how it relates to vines and vine quality and berry quality. He's really impressed on me that the later you start, the more your vines are adapted to stress. So it makes sense. Like if you have lots of water, it's a rainy year, May, there's plenty of water in the soil profile, and you start watering then you're babying your plants. They're going to be more used to that. They're going to need that more as the season goes on. But with the deficit approach, the reduced deficit approach, then if you can get them comfortable with a comfortable level of stress, you can't overstress things, but with a comfortable level of stress, and you start watering later, one, you might knock off a month or 6 weeks, or in some cases even more, of irrigation, which has a lot of benefits, but then you have a more water, a vine that's more adapted to those conditions, and then that's additional savings, additional benefits from that. So let's see, I think we're doing good on time. So the last time I talked to the VidTech group was probably about 4 or 5 years ago, and it was with Mark Greenspan and this soil scientist I mentioned, Josh Beniston, because we did a 2.5-year trial at the McLeod Vineyards in Kenwood. That's also Indian Springs Ranch. John McLeod, some of you might have known, and he was real interested in this topic too. And what was happening at the time, I was more involved with the water management side then, and I was hearing, working with different growers, talking to different growers, and they were very impassioned about their approach. And for some of them, it meant you got to till. You have to till because the competition from the weeds for water, nutrients is so significant. You got to till, and that's how you're going to manage your water and keep enough water for the vines. There were other people equally passionate saying you have to not till, and tillage is bad, and you shouldn't till, and you need the organic matter and you need the water to stay in the ground by not tilling. And so we didn't want to take sides. We wanted to get away from anecdotal thoughts and perspectives and look more like what is happening, in the soil. And so we worked with Mark and Josh, and we did this study at John McLeod's vineyard where we set up 3 treatments and then did 3 repetitions of each treatment. So that in that upper left, we found an area of the ranch that had kind of uniform soils. It did have uniform soils that would be consistent throughout. And it was a head trained old Zinn block there that'd been in for a while that was still healthy. And what we did is we created 100-foot treatments looking at each tillage style. So there's full till, where you tilled on both sides of the row, every year, twice a year. There was alternate till, where each year we would flip which we would flip, which side was tilled. The other would go to non-till for a year, which is something I think I probably see more of in the county than any other approach. And then we had the no-till ones, and we had three treatments of each one. And in the middle of each one, we put a soil moisture probe that was 3 to 4 feet, depending on how far down we could get with the probe. And then that took readings every half an hour for 2.5 years. And then we took soil samples at the beginning and afterwards in the same areas in each treatment. And so that was a lot of data points, because that's a half an hour for 2.5 years. So on the water side, Mark Greenspan figured out a way to analyze this, much to his credit. And what he found was amongst the different tillage treatments, there was nothing statistically significant in what he was seeing in the moisture and the drawdown levels in each one. He said it was almost statistically significant, but it wasn't. And really, it was a little different than what we expected. We found that in the 0 to 30 centimeter depth, so that's roughly 18 inches, that there was greater loss in the tilled areas, whereas the alternate till and then no-till lost less water in that top 18. But going deeper, and granted, the vines are going to be deeper roots, actually found greater water loss and greater loss in the other treatments and less water loss in the full till. And that seemed a little counterintuitive, but he had a good explanation that I think we're still thinking is right, that when you till, you're disrupting the evaporation channels. The soil has natural channels that lead to the surface, and when you're tilling twice a year, that's filling in those channels. So thus it was holding water at that lower level. On the soil side, we were surprised. We didn't think we'd find anything statistically significant in 2.5 years. That's a very short time for a soil study to see a change. But we actually did. The no-till and alternate row it had statistically significant more carbon in it in the total carbon measurement. So there, you can see 2.33% total carbon in the carbon in the no-till and all-till, 2.02% in the full till. As we got below that at the 10 to 20 centimeters, or 20 to 10 to 20, there was no demonstrable differences. And then the water aggregate stability test, which is really a measure of soil structure and how well it's holding together. It basically simulates a rain event in the lab. We saw that alternate till actually was the most stable, no till the next, but very close, and then lower at full till. That was not considered statistically significant, but it was getting close. So that was notable to find something that like that. So what's the takeaway from that trial? And before I forget, I have there's a 2-page fact sheet back there that has a write-up of that trial and more information, and I encourage you to take one of those with you. But here's the big takeaway, is that you can improve your soil health and reduce tillage without impacting water availability. That was like the main takeaway we got from that. That's really what Mark said. This is what we should pull from that. And that's great, because if you don't have to till as much, that's a lot of time you can save, a lot of wear and tear on your equipment. It's less cost, if you're paying a tractor driver or it's your time. So this was an important finding. So, we're almost there. So then, the big takeaways here can be a little repetitive, is that, we can increase organic matter to improve soil health and water retention. Improved water holding capacity means we can start later and potentially water less during the season. Starting irrigation later confers greater water stress tolerance for your vines. That can be very important for managing vigor, but improving berry quality, which is very important. And in the end, you're saving time, labor, pump wear and tear, money, and other costs. So that is the general thinking. I have a couple slides here. These are different articles that have good information related to what I'm talking about, and I put that on a one-page sheet back there. I didn't bring as many of those, but if they run out, just be in touch with me. I need to get my card out there, and then I can email you this, which would be probably more useful for you anyway, because then those links are live. And that is it. Brett's going to talk for a couple minutes on that, but I think we have a few minutes for any questions or thoughts that people want to share before we hear from Brett about distribution uniformity and doing DU and pump testing. Scott.
Larger study you referenced, what was the sampling depth for the soil samples?
Oh, it wasn't super deep. I'm forgetting exactly. I'd have to look that up. I don't remember, but it was in row crops, and so it was not, it wasn't as deep, and it wasn't as deep as vines. But I'd have to look that up. That's a good question.
And then in your study with Mark, are you saying that you were able to change the organic matter in the top 4 inches, but not below that?
It didn't change. It wasn't like significantly different as you went past 10 centimeters, but it was in the top 10.
Yeah. So is that fair to say that we're changing the organic content of a soil where we tend to think of it volumetrically if we really only change the top 4 inches?
I think it would be unfair to say you are, but if you could do this study longer, I think you'd start to get a better answer, like of what's happening lower down. And I don't think, like I said, Scott, like Josh Beniston was like kind of shocked that that we saw as much change in the top, 4 inches or 6 inches as we did. And so he was like, it just was too short a study. It would be great if we could keep doing this. And I didn't mention, we do have Andrews here. We have a study that's, like 7 years in at Jackson Family at the La Crema Sarah Lee's Vineyard. And we are measuring total carbon there. And, we're seeing trends. I don't know if anything's statistically significant, and if you want to say anything or not, you could right now. But that's more of a long-term study. So I think that's really what could answer your questions, because I don't want to say like, oh yeah, your vines are going to, at 4 feet deep are going to be dramatically different. But this, longer-term study might start showing more of those results and what that answer is. Unfortunately, Jackson Family, we don't have the water. We don't have the soil moisture probes in that one, but we are doing the same 3 sets of tillage, and we're doing it with and without compost. And there's going to be some more results from that. I think in the next, in a year or two, we'll do another bigger, more robust sampling there, and that might start to answer some of these questions. Andrew, do you want to add to that, or would you prefer not to?
I haven't looked at it recently. I think I need internet connection, but it's a good study.
Yeah. He's in the middle of it now, so it's cool, yeah, because to have a working vineyard, such a long-term study is real opportunity.
We took samples last May, and it's a couple hundred composites, so we took 700 soil samples, which is a lot of work.
Right.
But we're going into 8th year, I believe, and currently, as far as I know, we'll sample again next year.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it's really nice to just the longevity of it. I'm shocked to see the change also in just 2.5 years. I mean, just think conceptually about making a meaningful difference in soil and in that short of a period of time is amazing.
Right, because I think Josh told me one time, 10 years is what you would expect to take to see some of these changes. And Anya, who's part of the study in my office, was saying they're starting to see trends in improvements, in the as there's less tillage in the nitrogen and the soil organic carbon, but hasn't really been analyzed at the same level as this other one at this point. So we don't necessarily have those results. And yeah, when we hit year 9 or 10, then we're going to be doing a much bigger sampling and hopefully get the kind of results we want to see. There was a question here?
Yeah, more of a comment, to your questions. Dr. Kate Scow at Davis, I think she might be retired now, did a whole bunch of really cool work kind of less in vines and more in grazing, but some of that work is they were sampling at a shallow depth, right? And they were like, why aren't we seeing anything? We're doing all this addition, and then out of the blue, they decided to go deeper, and they found deposition at 24 inches. They had just missed it because they were only sampling in the top 12 inches because that's what they thought. So like, you know, there's another UC one where that's very popular, and they sampled the top 10 centimeters. Well, like vines don't live in the top 10 centimeters, really. I'm a soil scientist. Like, you know, you can get deposition at varying depths depending on what your system is, right? So it's just easier to sample at a shallow versus going deeper. But her studies were really interesting because they were like, why aren't we're adding all this stuff, we're doing all, and then they like, oh, it's accumulating at 24 inches because that's where the roots, the living root, was doing all the work.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And you know, soils are so variable, and there's in Sonoma County they're really variable, and in small areas they can change. I mean, one weakness of this study at McLeod's was that's like in the volcanic Sonoma area, which is like the weirdest soil. Like really, it's not to be counted on as much because so much variability in such a short space. Where I'm looking to like. This La Crema site we think is way like better. It's kind of like more alluvial bottom valley. It's like I think that's a much better reflection of a more general look at things. So that, I mean, we worked with McLeod because he was excited about it, and we had to act quick. And he, you know, having a willing partner is very important. But you know, it's just like every site's going to be different. So like what he was saying, like they found all this stuff at 24 inches, like that doesn't surprise me, but that might not be the site that we did it at. So I'm hoping that this La Crema site will give us good information.
Actually, to add on to that comment, how does the organic matter actually sift down through all these different levels? Because if you're going to do it at 10 centimeters or whatever it is, that's where all your prunings and everything.
Right.
Mowings.
Well, that's a complicated question. It's a great question, though, because I think there's different mechanisms that happens. You know, there's both like when you apply compost, there's carbon in that compost, but then the carbon also stimulates like biological activity, and then you have all these organisms, and they're exuding compost-rich, you know, materials into there, and then they're dying, and they're, you know, it's dissipating into the system, and that's, you know, yeah, that's maybe happening higher up, but then as you go lower down, there's different things happening, and there's the root interaction, and there's the way the water sifts through it, which is very different site to site. I mean, if you have anything you'd like to offer on that.
Yeah, I mean, this is like, so I have a degree in soil science. I'm 50 years old, right? So when we were taught, and if you're my age, you were taught, okay, all this stuff, we're putting it on the surface and the creatures wiggle it down. That's how organic matter is made. That is 100%, like, not 100% false. That's like 90% false, right? The organic matter, 90% of it is made from the living root, right? Plants are constantly leaking photosynthate, sugar, all the time. This is why if the rhizosphere is so crazy, all this, you know, right around this, all this activity, because they're constantly dumping sugar. So if you have a root zone, like a grapevine, let's say, that's 4 feet deep, that vine is dumping carbon at 4 feet and 3 feet and 2 feet. If you're cultivating, like, let's say you're cultivating like crazy, right? Most people don't do that anymore, but like, and you don't have any roots in the 12 inches, yeah, of course you're not going to get any carbon. There's no plants there, right? This is the same why if you're applying herbicide and you have that dead berm, why there's a problem there, because there's no plants to produce carbon to make that soil better. So like most of it is the living plant. So this is why cover crops, like let's not cultivate, like, right? So if you have a mustard or something that has a bigger root zone, or, you know, maybe you've seen on social media, like, hey, this prairie plant has roots that are like super huge, right? The organic matter is made from the living root. If you have that idea that it's constantly dumping carbon into the soil. So the more you have living root, the more carbon you're gonna get, one way or the other.
Right.
Now, you may terminate that at some point because of we grow crop, right? We're here to make money and grow grapes, not just put carbon in the ground, right? But if you have that concept, then it's always going to be better. I have sites that we farmed that in Napa County that are old. The vines are old, right? And we're organic, whatever, right? And I have 3% organic matter, and it blew my mind. I had to do the test like 4 times at 36 inches. I got 6% organic matter, or in some cases 7 at the top. This is a system that's been cultivated for 30, 40 years differentially. It's the vine that dumped all that carbon. It's not that case, it's not the cover crop. This is an old Freedom rootstock, like, older 916, like, it's not shallow, little, like, so it really depends on your system.
Right.
But it's the living root that is actually, like, yes, there's a little of what I was taught where, your cud's on the surface that wiggles down or moves down. It's really the living root that produces all of the organic matter.
Yeah, that's a lot of really good points there.
Sorry.
And the one other thing I'll add to that, and then I'm going to turn it over to Brett, just because I want to honor our 12 o'clock ending time. She's got a few minutes here. Is that what I saw some article, and I wish I could remember it. Like, vines shed an incredible amount of roots, like in the soil, like every year. Like I saw something like 30, 40, 50% of the roots are kind of dying off, and that's all part of this, what he's talking about. Like, so both when they're alive, they're exuding stuff, but then the dead roots that are sloughing off as part of every season are another like decaying form of carbon. And so, it's there's the worms, and there's the cover crop, and the compost, and the roots, and a whole bunch of stuff happening. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you both of you for your input, and I'm going to let Brett take it from here.
I'll be quick.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Brett LeDuc. I am the Agriculture Project Manager with the Sonoma RCD. Where I'm going to talk really quickly about distribution uniformity tests and pump efficiency tests, because we're offering those services to growers in Sonoma free of cost right now. So if you're interested in getting this information on your farm, on your equipment, please let me know. I have a sign-up sheet in the back and some flyers as well. So take advantage of it. We'll test your eligibility in your area, especially if you're, funding is kind of limited. We're running out soon. The grant is closing up. So let me know if you're interested. So first, distribution uniformity evaluations. This is going to measure how evenly water is being applied across your vineyard. This helps to ensure every vine receives the right amount of water or fertigation for optimal growth. So, essentially, if you're not getting that even distribution, you might be treating a problem area by applying more water, and then your areas where your uniformity is good, then you're getting less water there. So overall, you're over-applying somewhere, under-applying elsewhere, and no matter how you adjust that irrigation system, you're going to get that uneven distribution. So we can identify uneven pressure, clogged emitters, or system wears, and then you get a report at the end that provides you with a range of recommendations, which that can be like, hey, you should be flushing your system more often, or this needs to be replaced, or you have different emitters in this field, and then that's impossible to be getting, uniform distribution when they're different drip rates. Or it might be like, hey, this is a 30-year-old vine. When did this irrigation system get installed? And it might be time to be planning for the future of that irrigation system at the end of its lifespan. So this just provides us, we go out, we measure in these little bottles. I get to hang out in the vineyard all day and get away from my desk, so I love to do it. And then at the end, again, you'll get that report, and you'll get a list of recommendations, and we can chat about it with you and see what you want to prioritize or plan for. And then for the pump efficiency test, one of our contractors will come and test your pump system. So this evaluates how effectively your irrigation pump is converting that energy into water flow and pressure. So this is just kind of ensuring that your pump system is operating as intended or not. So we can identify any inefficiencies in your equipment, worn parts, and proper sizing, especially if your system is older. And a lot of times this just might, again, like the DU, lead to just better maintenance recommendations and replacements or what have you that will extend the equipment life and get you to improve your pump performance. Improving your pump performance. This is a list of kind of why you would want to do this. Some things are grant compliance or regulatory compliance. This can help you with, and we are here to fund these tests right now. So if you have any of those compliance things that you want to get right now, we can do that for you for free. So you can lower your utility bills if you discover that you're operating at a way lower efficiency rate. You're overworking your pump for no reason and paying to run it. So most of our pump efficiency tests also come with a cost estimate of what you might be saving and what those improvements to your pump can save you every year. Or you get that peace of mind of, hey, your pump is working great, you're doing good maintenance on it, good work. So either or, hopefully it's the latter. And then just another quick plug, if you're in Alexander Valley as a resident or a farmer or a grower, any ag system, I have flyers back here as well for TA and funding coming up for Alexander Valley growers. And then we also have a compost survey. If you're interested in getting reduced price compost, I have a survey QR flyer back there as well. You can take that, get registered, and get updates on reduced compost coming up. And then lastly, for our farm crews, we have a Spanish language soil health and irrigation efficiency workshop coming up at Schoen Farm. That is on March 10th, so entirely in Spanish. And it's a full day. We're doing distribution uniformity training at that test. So we'll go out into the field at Schoen Farm and do a demo with the crew. And that is then something that you guys can incorporate into your personal irrigation maintenance and management at your vineyards. So please consider, I have English and Spanish flyers in the back. I didn't bring a whole bunch, so take a photo, text it to the crew if you're interested. It's a free class, 8 hours, lunch will be provided. And again, entirely in Spanish, so grab one of those flyers, take a photo, text it around. It's a really good training. It's super comprehensive, and I think the team gets a lot out of it. So we're excited to be providing that. This is year 3, we're providing that. So it's a really good course. I recommend having the gang come to it. So any questions? Cool. This is my contact info. I also have business cards. I am the person to talk to about any of those resources. If you're wanting to get on the signing up list for any of those, let me know. We'll keep you connected to what's coming up for free for farmers.
Thank you, Brett. All right, thanks again to all our presenters today, and thanks for showing up. We'll see you in March. Awesome.